All right. Perfect. We are live. So,
hello.
and then I see the little viewership thing here. We'll give them a minute to tune in. Bonjour, Tina. Welcome back.
Bonjour, Tina. Tina has been my information goddess of all things getting a French visa.
Oh, yes. That's
She's
so
amazing.
Have somebody that knows how to do visa stuff.
Yes.
It's always super fun.
Hey, Christina.
Christina's here. Danielle's back.
Yeah.
We gotta wait for our good friend Debbie. There's
There
Debbie.
she is.
I love the pictures of Debbie's kids' graduation. So cute.
So cute.
I feel so bad for all the graduates. 2020 was supposed to be such a good year to graduate. I feel like 2020 sounds so cool. Tina.
It's already June.
Team Hadley. I thought you were Team Zelda.
She likes both.
Like all these French ladies.
Team Hadley, not Team Mary. We'll get into that.
Yeah, we need to talk about that. We're going to definitely be talking about Mary, guys. If you don't know who Mary is, she was Hemingway's last wife, and we are not a fan of her.
No.
She was not a nice person. I wish we could see you guys. That would be like a live Zoom chat situation, I guess.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll have to do that one.
Zoom it up. We'll be Zooming for our book club if you're reading the book.
Yeah, June 24th.
Mira, did you read The Paris Wife? You did read The Paris Wife. I was obsessed with that book. I was so sad when I finished it. It's one of those books you don't want to stop reading.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It's sweet, Mira. We love you.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So I guess we can get started. Today we were talking about Hadley Hemingway with Claudine Hemingway, which really got me confused. Just trying And for those of you who don't know, Hadley was Ernest's first wife, and they lived in Paris together. So I'm going to let Claudine take it from here about what exactly happened with Hadley. And I feel like she was maybe one of the most favorite wives. So we can talk about that later. Hi, Kathleen. All right. Take it from here, Claudine.
So Hadley, as everybody knows, because I think probably has everybody read The Paris Wife? I'm sure most people have. The Paris Wife is, a great book. It is a fiction book. I kind of sometimes have my issues with historical fiction, but that's another story. So, Hadley Hemingway Richardson, I should say Hadley Richardson, was born in 1891 and in St. Louis, and she grew up there. She had her family was kind of, her mom was not really the sweetest mom. Her father later on killed himself. So it's, another sad connection through both Ernest and Hadley's life. But at a very young age, she would stay at home. She was kind of a quiet girl, and she would, play the piano, but her mom kind of was really a little overprotective. Later on, her sister ended up dying in a fire that her sister was married. She was pregnant. She had 2 kids. There was a fire in the yard next to their house, and she was wearing a longer dress. She went out there to go put the fire out, and the fire caught her dress on fire and her stockings. Oh, she ended up losing her baby. And then later, 8 days later, she ended up passing away too. And when that happened, her mother freaked out. Hadley was going to college at Bryn Mawr, and where another Hemingway wife would also go to as well, Martha. But she was at Bryn Mawr, and her mom was like, nope, you're coming home. You have to come home. And so she made her come home. And later, her mom got pretty sick. And so Hadley was taking care of her mom, living this life that was just basically stuck inside the house with her mom. And so she was pretty shy and kind of quiet. So her mom died. And 3 weeks after her mom died, she went up to Chicago to see a friend of hers, Kate Smith. And while she was in Chicago, that is when she met Ernest Hemingway.
And she was a little older than Ernest, right? If I read right.
8 years older.
8 years, little cradle rock.
Yeah, quite the cougar, that Hadley. So they met, and when they met, they instantly were attracted to each other. And over the 3 weeks that she stayed in Chicago, they would see each other all the time. They would, meet up for little dates and, sometimes have a chaperone back then. And then when she returned back to St. Louis, they would send letters to each other like every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. which amazes me that the postal service worked that way back then, that you would get mail delivery 3 times a day.
Yeah, I don't know that that's like texting. That was like, that was
yeah,
really
I mean, it was basically, yeah, it was instant messaging back then, pretty much. So they kept in contact for quite a while, and then she went back up there to go to Chicago to visit, and they had decided they were going to get married. So they ended up getting married in a very small wedding ceremony in Michigan. And so not many people were there. They had a engagement party before that Ernest almost didn't even make himself, because he was busy writing an article. And so he almost missed it as well. So in September 1921, they got married. And a few months after, right after they got married, they moved to Chicago to a little apartment that when I was there in November, Debbie and I had to go, of course, and go find it. They really need to work on their plaque. It was basically a piece of paper. And some of the info was actually inaccurate. So of course I had pointed that out, but it's pretty cool. But they lived there for about 2 months, and then they left to go to Paris. First, they were actually going to go to Rome, and his friend Sherwood Anderson said, "No, you should go to Paris. You know, it's so cheap to live there. That's where you want to go, is Paris." So they're like, "Okay, so we'll go to Paris." So Sherwood Anderson set them up with all these letters of introduction. He told them, where to stay at the Hotel Jacob on Rue Jacob. He gave them letters of to meet Sylvia Beach and Gertrude Stein and all of these people. So they basically went there and had their whole path laid out for them because of Sherwood Anderson.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that part. I knew they had gone and that they were basically living on the trust fund her father left when he killed himself, right?
Her father and her uncle, this uncle that she did not like, left her some money. And so, back then, I think, I think it was about $5,000 back then, which was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
You could live in Paris for a year for less than that.
Yeah, they were not starving artists in Paris, I think.
No, they weren't I mean, they were, the whole thing, if you could be, we were young and poor and in love and happy.
Yeah.
So they got to Paris and they found the apartment on Rue de Carnel-les-Moines. And I think there's some people actually, Carol, some other people I have actually given tours to. So they have seen these things. But they moved into that apartment, and it was, a fifth floor walk up that had, no running water. The floor was at a slant. It wasn't, exactly, the Paris of your dreams to think of this apartment. Yeah. And they had the Turkish toilet, in basically the stairwell. But they would send letters back to his family and say, "Oh, it's perfect. It's wonderful. We're in Paris. This apartment's so great. We have this space." And they really, it was very small.
Yeah. They lived modest.
They lived very modestly. But, I think those were also probably some of their happiest times that they both ever had in Paris too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that he ended up getting his own studio for writing too, which was nice. He could kind of escape and do his thing and write.
Yeah, so he would spend a lot of the time in the cafe, which is now Café Del Mott, which is in Place de Contrescarpe, which has just, the cafe has actually just reopened after a couple of years. But right around the corner, he rented an apartment at the very, very top of I think it was the 7th floor. And he just had a tiny, tiny wood oven to keep him warm, and he was able to look out the window and see the Pantheon. But you could go there, you could see it today. It says the plaque on the building says that he lived there, and the dates are wrong, but you can still dates are wrong. Yeah, I learned that you don't always trust the plaques.
That's good to know. I guess no one else is really fact checking the plaques, but Claudine, I like it.
Yeah, exactly. I've go through all over Paris. But they, Hadley would spend her days, she played the piano a lot when she was growing up. And so she would spend her days, the Bal Musette that was down below had a piano, and they would let her come in there and play. Their friends in Paris really pushed her to do a little concert. But she didn't really love that idea too much. But, she was also very creative. at the same, obviously everybody knows Ernest Hemingway was, a creative writer, but, Hadley also had her thing. She wasn't just sitting there, at home doing nothing all day.
What was she into? Was she a writer? Did she paint? She played piano, obviously.
She played piano. She did write a little bit, but nothing really, nothing that she really ever, published or did anything with. Mm-hmm. So, they had those days where they, would say they'd go watch horse races. They'd go watch boxing matches. So they were really well matched in the fact that, they were both really outdoorsy. They loved to, do things like hiking and, go skiing in the winter for, months at a time. They'd go stay in Austria and go skiing. So they had, they were kind of a really good match where that was concerned. And then, as we know, down the road, other people came in the situation.
Wife number two.
The wife number two. But, they ended up, they got pregnant while they were in Paris. I don't think it was exactly intended at the time to, that they wanted to have a child. But, they got pregnant. They went back to Toronto to have the baby. They were worried about having a child in France. So they went back to Toronto. And then when they came back, they moved to just the base of Montparnasse and onto Rue Notre-Dame des Champs. And so they lived there above a sawmill. And so they would hear, like the sounds of the sawmill all day long. So they lived there. And then, it was Bumby who got the name because they thought he resembled a teddy bear.
Oh, that's cute.
Yeah, it's very cute. But I guess later in life, Jack was not so happy. Like he hated people calling him Bumby, and his dad still did until he died. And he was the only one. He said that was the only person he was going to let call him Bumby. Oh,
Dad's nickname.
Dad's nickname.
I totally agree with Mira that was his greatest love. I feel like was Hadley because they were young, and it was his dream to like live in Europe and write. Mm-hmm. And it was before he was anybody. He wasn't famous when they were together.
No. Yeah. He just was writing, articles for, the Toronto paper and doing some other things like that. But, he had started to write The Sun Also Rises at this period. He did publish his one book while they lived together. And they lived together at Cardinal Lamont, but that was the only book that he had published at that time. And then he started The Sun Also Rises. And, that was kind of finished after they had split up with when he was with Pauline. So that side of the story, he met her in March, and he met her at a party, and she, Pauline was working for Vogue magazine and, in Paris. And so he, she was quite fancy. And so they became friends. And then she ended up becoming friends as well with Hadley, and kind of just like would just come over to their house. She just, would come over to their apartment, hang out with them. They went skiing. They went to Schruns, Austria to go skiing one time. And Hadley just decided to follow them, and just showed up there.
Had other plans because she was kind of pretending to be Hadley's friend and hanging out, but I think all along she was kind of after Ernest.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So, at first Hadley, I think, was just kind of like, oh, this is, she was her friend too. And so everything was just kind of fine. And then down the road, a year later after they met is when they kind of started having their affair.
And it took a year.
Yeah, it took a year. And then just a month later, Hadley went down to the Loire Valley with Pauline and her sister, Ginny. And Pauline told Hadley that she was having an affair with her husband.
She told her.
Yeah, she told her. She told her that she was. So then they decided to go to the south of France, and Hadley invited Pauline to come down with them.
Interesting.
So when they went down to the south of France, and then they came back, and this is when, this is 1926. And so when they returned from, the south of France, and then they went to Spain, when they returned from Spain to Paris, that's when they decided, like, we're going to split up. We're not doing this.
Yeah.
So, the famous story goes that, Hadley gave him 100 days and said, you have to stay apart from each other for, 3 months to 100 days. And at that point, if you could do that and you still are in love, then I will give you a divorce. Well, she, said this on November 3rd, and then just, within, by the 14th of November, she said, okay, you forget it. You could have the divorce.
Mm-hmm. I feel like she was the more mature one in that situation.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yeah. So, Pauline, I've always thought, would we have the Ernest Hemingway we know of today if it wasn't for Pauline? Because with Pauline and her, her family had a lot of money. Her family's money paid for Cuba and Key West and the safaris. And that's kind of the macho bravado that everybody knows of Hemingway. So, would we have that if there wasn't a Pauline?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because he did well by marrying rich all the time. Well, not rich, but at least women with money, because he didn't have any money. He was just a writer. Jenny said she's from Toronto. Do you know where they stayed in Toronto? Do you
not off the top of my head. They stayed in like a small apartment. I know I have the street written down. I'll post it in here afterwards. But they just stayed in the little apartment. He hated it there. They hated Toronto, being in Toronto. Sorry, Jenny. But yeah, they didn't like being in Toronto. I think it was probably also where they lived. I think they lived close to train tracks, and it was pretty noisy. And he was really unhappy at the time writing for the Toronto Star. So I think it was just kind of a little collection of a lot of things at one time that made that period of their life not so happy.
Now, I'm curious, I know you asked before, but how many of you have read The Paris Wife? Because I'm curious. Yeah, Catherine Watts said, didn't she get the money from The Sun Also Rise? And that was before she knew it was even going to be a seller, right?
So when they got divorced, she's the one who filed divorce against him. When they, in the divorce, he gave them all the rights to The Sun Also Rises, and that also included all the movie rights too. So they, within a few months of time, I think she had already got like $7,000 at that time. $7,000 in, the 1930s would be a lot of money right now.
Yeah, she got her share that. Mira's read the book twice. Oh, wow. If you read the book, can you hit the thumbs up? I'm curious how many people read the book. I was obsessed with the book. I definitely recommend reading it. It's called The Paris Wife. But I know Claudine mentioned earlier that maybe everything in it wasn't so true. Like, where do you see some discrepancy?
Well, where I always have an issue with historical fiction is, I think it's definitely like, it's not like I read it where I read some books and I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's not right. That didn't happen. That's the wrong street. That's the wrong this. I think she had all of that right. It's just that, you can't, she creates conversations between them when you're obviously not in that conversation. Yeah. So, the basis of the book is all very accurate to the timing and kind of what was going on. But, I have seen people quote the book as saying it was, it wasn't an actual Hemingway quote. Mm-hmm. But they'll say, oh, this is from, Ernest Hemingway and The Paris Wife. And it's like, wait a minute.
Because she couldn't actually quote them unless I know she got a lot of the information from letters between them. And writing those historical fiction books is tough because you're basically just going through history and trying to pull and make a story. Yeah. And you want to stay I always want to stay as close to the accurate facts as possible, the dates and times and things like that. Another book to read that's Paris Without End. And it's by Gio Dilberto. I put it on my website, on my ClaudineHemingway.com, and I have a boutique on there. So I've listed, there's a ton of my favorite books on there, but I listed on there. That one's actually really great. It was written before The Paris Wife, and it was a biography about Hadley. And the author used a bunch of recordings, like tape recordings of interviews that Hadley did with a friend of hers. So it's really, really great. So if you've read The Paris Wife, you should definitely read this one too. Oh, yeah. No, I definitely think it's worth a read. Like, it's just a great book. But as someone else said in the group, like, you shouldn't, Danielle said, it's a theme. You can't see them all as facts. But it's really, I remember when I finished that book, I went like deep into the internet and read everything about every family member of Hemingway. And because everyone knows Hemingway, like Ernest Hemingway, but no one really knows about the rest of his life and the women. Yeah. Like, the women were so fascinating that he married. Yeah. There were so many different personalities. Yeah. And that is what's great about historical fiction, because it gets, it pulls people in, just like you said, it pulls them in, and then they start going down, the many rabbit holes that I love to go down and just find out everything I could find out about more on the subject. Yeah, I agree with Mira too. She said it doesn't like vilify Hemingway. It just gives you a different perspective because all we had was his point of view. And when you read
Yeah.
that book, you definitely see, okay, you know, how they hung out with other people like the Fitzgerald and just like the interactions they had, the travel. It's really interesting to get a perspective from a woman during
Yeah,
that time.
definitely. And that, that also is, the vilifying Ernest, there's a little bit of that from A Movable Feast. And this is where I have my my strong opinion, we could call it, about Mary Hemingway, his fourth wife. Everybody knows the story about Movable Feast. That after they found this trunk in the Ritz, and it had all these papers that he had written, all these parts of this book. And so later on, after his death, it all got put together. When it got put together by his fourth wife, Mary, and a editor. And if you're gonna ever read that book, you have to find this one specifically, the restored edition, because the restored edition, this is actually really fascinating because his son and grandson were involved in this one, and they actually took his actual original notes and his writings from the book. Mary and the editors changed a lot of things. They actually changed a lot of the stories between him and Fitzgerald, making him look a little bit more like a jerk than he actually was because a lot of people come away from this book thinking, wow, he really, hated Fitzgerald, or they didn't get along. They made it sound a little worse. Mary also changed some of the stories, took things out about Mary in the book as well. So it just really kind of bothers me.
Yeah, I think it's cool they gave us the other book that wasn't so highly, edited by Mary.
Yeah. So she, Mary was his fourth wife. Hadley and Hemingway still were very close all the way up until he died. They still would send each other letters all the time. He would send her gifts on her birthday. In 1933, they were he happened to be going through Paris on the way back from a safari. She had been remarried at this point to a man named Paul Maurer, and he was also a writer from Chicago. And he ran into her. He was sitting at Brasserie Lippe, and he looked out the window, and there was Hadley standing outside. They hadn't seen each other since they got divorced, which seems kind of strange because he they had a child, but he looked up and he thought, oh, like that's Hadley. And so he goes running out there, and, they greeted each other, and it was all really nice and sweet. And, he's like, come back in and, have a glass of, champagne with me. And so they completely sat there and had just like a lovely little time. That was the only time they would see each other
since the divorce.
Yeah. And he had said that he had gone to the Louvre one day, and he thought, which I was like, oh, I love that even more. He went to the Louvre and he thought he saw her. And when he saw this woman, he walked up to her, and it wasn't Hadley. And he said that I will, for, the rest of my life, always be looking for you.
Oh, that's so sweet. I definitely agree with Mira and some of the other viewers that Hadley was his favorite. It was such like an innocent period for him before he had the plane crashes and the safaris and the war time. He was a changed person after all that.
Yeah. I mean, Hadley, she, they still stayed, they stayed close, and her husband seemed to be okay with that. After, when they were young, when they were first in Paris, Gertrude Stein is the famous is for saying, don't buy clothes, don't spend your money on anything. Oh, buy art. And he really wanted this painting by Miro called The Farm. And so he had saved up money, and he bought this painting, and they had it in Paris. And they always had it their whole life. And he had said to Hadley, he's like, I'm going to keep, I'm going to keep it in for 6 months down in Cuba. And then you'll have it back, and it's all in writing. But he just kept it there the whole time. And Hadley, kind of didn't care, but she wanted it, for Jack, for Bumby. And so after he died, she had found, she had the letter, but Mary had also found some of the documents that said that this was supposed to come back to her, and she destroyed them.
She destroyed them.
Yeah. And now the painting is in a museum. But there was also, there's also things that say, that she was nice to her a little bit because of she wanted to keep the painting.
Yeah.
But
Had to keep the peace. Stu's asking, do you think Hadley really likes Gertrude Stein? What do you think?
I don't think that, because when they go over to like the salons at Gertrude Stein's house, Hadley was considered, she was one of the wives. So Hadley would be sent to another room with the other wives with Alice B. Toklas. And so I don't know. I don't think there was a big warm connection between the two, between Hadley and Gertrude Stein. But it wasn't really like, Zelda and how her feelings were for Hemingway.
Needed him. Cheryl's talking about The Paris Husband, which talks about Ernest. Have you read that?
Yeah.
Have you read that?
Yeah, I have read that one. Yeah, it's kind of a shorter book, isn't it, Cheryl? I think it wasn't a big, huge book. I think, I thought it was definitely interesting. I mean, I don't think it's definitely not on par. The Paris Wife is so good, and it's really, really well written. It's such a great book. Mm-hmm. But, somebody, of course, was going to come out with the other side.
Yeah, definitely. We needed both sides. But I feel like Ernest kind of got his sides out just from writing all his books. Yeah. We kind of got his tone.
Yeah.
Never read such masculine writing. He feels like so.
Yeah, for sure. So he's asking, Hadley amongst the wives inspired in those. I think so, because she was the one that didn't have I don't think Hadley ever wanted anything from him. And that's what he also said too. Martha, he gets with, Pauline, and she kind of wants this, that's when he started to become big. It was after The Sun Also Rises. He was starting to get well known during their period of their marriage. I think she always wanted something from him. Martha definitely was another writer and a war correspondent. So she was the female version of Hemingway. Yeah. And, I think there was definitely a big competition there. And then Mary, but,
Mary.
Yeah, my friend John Baxter says that he thinks that, Mary was the love of his life. I still think it's Hadley though.
Yeah. I think that Hadley was his first real puppy dog love. And then maybe she was his mature love. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the fact that they still had a close relationship through the rest of their life, I think is, awfully telling as well. Yeah.
It's just sad how it all, with Pauline, there's the when she took all of the copies and his manuscripts and the carbons, to bring to him to Geneva. Mm-hmm. And, she put them on put them onto the train and then walked back out to go get, a drink, and came back and it was gone. And, that was definitely a big telling moment. But, he actually, I think in the letters, all the letters that he's written, he actually handled it better than, it's the movable, some people will say that, he was furious and, but I think it also gave him a chance to start over.
Yeah. He changed his writing after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a good thing because his writing became famous.
Yeah, exactly. So he's there's a lot of with Pauline, and I think Hadley's the most known wife of them, because I think his Paris years are also the most known for his time. People know of Cuba and they know of safaris, but you don't see it like you do I think because of a movable feast. But it's also what's kind of talked about, and it's actually a very short period of his life that he spent in Paris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how many years was it there? Only 2 years, right?
No, he was there he left in 26, so they were there for he was there almost 6 years.
That's a pretty fair amount of time.
Yeah. So they left.
That 10 years is the leave time for a lot of people. They can't take more than 10 years.
Yeah, they left after when Pauline got pregnant.
Okay, when she got pregnant. That's right. The baby in the States. Mm-hmm. Someone is asking, do you think the relationship with Gertrude Stein made Hemingway more independent? Do you think she made him grow up? I know she was a big influence in his life.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely he really admired her opinion of his writing. And when he first gave her pages to read, she didn't like him at all. And one of my favorite stories is that she told him that you need to go to the Musée de Luxembourg, which is, still a museum today. At the time, it was the Museum of French artists at the time, and all of the paintings from that period of time and now in the Louvre, the Orsay. But there was a big Cezanne exhibition going on, and she said, you need to go there and you need to just look at his paintings, and you need to see how Cezanne paints and how he does his landscapes and he does still life, and how he takes like such a focused look at one thing, but it tells so much. Mm-hmm. And so she, that was kind of I think that Gertrude definitely had one of the biggest influences on his writing, ever, because she was the one who kind of, he's famous for his short sentences and what he doesn't say. And that's, a lot of that, I think, was Gertrude's influence on him.
Yeah, that was his mentor. I mean, that really kind of helped him develop his work, and she was very critical of it, which helped.
Yes, yeah, and they definitely had a falling out later. She wrote some pieces very critical of both Hemingway and Picasso, and they'd have these salons at her apartment, and you'd have Matisse there, Picasso, and Hemingway, and all of these people, which blows my mind to think just to be a fly on that wall.
Paris.
Yeah, but see, they had a bit of a falling out, and then it was pretty bad there.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating, Hadley, and really, if you want to know anything about her, The Paris Wife is the book to read. But are there any other books that you recommend to learn about her? Really?
Another one that I really like. I was pulling them out this morning, and I also have this listed. If you go to my website, and then in the boutique, there's a lot of them. But this is another really great one, Hemingway. Is it going to show up? Hemingway and Love, his own story, and these are by A.E. Hotchner, and can you see? It's all right. He wrote a couple books. He spent a lot of time with Hemingway, especially in the later years. And he would write, he would do all of his script approval when they would adapt his books to movies and TV. Mm-hmm. And Hotchner was the one in this book. This one came out. He waited to release this one until after Mary died. Mm-hmm. Hemingway and Love. He's written a couple books, and they're all really great books. But because he had recordings of their conversations, so it's like I actually trust what the information he's putting out too, a little bit more.
Yeah.
But he had said that when he when at the end of his life, Hemingway was sent to the Mayo Clinic for electric shock therapy. Not a lot of people, that's not a big story, they tell about him. And so at the very, he was there once. He convinced them to let him go home, go back to Idaho. And he was like, okay, yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to go back. And so he goes back. They find him one day she finds him one day with a shotgun. And so she panicked, called the doctor. They sent him back to the Mayo Clinic, and he had all the electric shock therapy. So he was there. Hotchner went back to go visit him. And, he said it was really hard to see this old friend of his, they'd be, catching these huge marlins and stuff off the coast of Cuba. And, now here he was, and he was he said he wanted to work on the end of Moo Feast, and he wanted it to be about Hadley. So I just posted it last night on my Instagram, Claudine Bleu, Blanc, Rouge, about that. And then, because everybody always thinks The Movable Feast is a love story to Paris, but I think it's actually the love story to Hadley. And so if you read, after you know this, and you know that he wanted to add this last part to his story of Hadley, and then you read, go back and read those last three or four paragraphs, even thinking about it, I could almost cry. It's just when that, when he's like, well, we were young and we were happy and all this stuff, that was one of the last things he wanted to do, was to make sure that, his dedication and this love to Hadley was there.
It was preserved through the writing. That's so sweet. I love that.
Yeah. He's not that bad of a guy.
A little romantic at the end of the day.
Yes.
Jess said that we should have an afternoon wine when we are in Paris to talk more about Hadley and time travel together. How about August? Jenny's planning her travel with you, Claudine.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, hopefully. Today they just said that July 1st they're going to start opening some of the borders. So
yeah, I heard that in Europe that you'll be around. Europeans can travel throughout Europe, but I don't know about Americans yet. I feel
not yet, but I'm hopeful for the fall.
Yeah, me too. Definitely August or September would be great.
Yes.
Oh, man, love you.
Yeah, but there's lots of there's a million books out there Hemingway, but the Hadley ones, I mean, those are definitely, if you didn't catch them, they're again on my website. Just scroll down. I kind of added some just the other day at the bottom. And the one that Paris Without End is really, really great.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many good books about that period. And Movable Feast is a great book, but I now want to read the new one you told me where they fixed all the mistakes that Mary took out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. Like I actually bought it, Shakespeare and Company, and I would sit places and go through and I'm underlining all these things in the book.
Yeah,
I mean, I have I have a French version. I have so many.
You really have to be the fact checker for these guys.
And I'm like, that's wrong.
You are not right. Yeah. What meal makes you think most of Ernest?
Oh, well, he really loved I love going to Brasserie Leap. And that's one of my favorites. And the first time, I was going to go there, I was like, oh, well, I should have, what he had, but he really loved the sausage and the, charcuterie, like the basically, sauerkraut kind of thing and a big thing of beer. And we're going to just have to differ on that one a little bit.
American German in a way.
Yeah. But I do have today, I did pull out my I had a bottle of Tavel wine, and this is a rosé from the south of France, from the Rhone region, and that was one of his very favorites. It's very different from most rosés that you have. It's pretty dry, and it's got a lot more body than just your regular very light rosé. But I did today. I was like, oh, I think I have that in the refrigerator. I better pull that out.
This is favorite. And we just recorded actually a podcast episode all about Hadley that you can listen to later. We're still working on Marie Antoinette. I don't know if you guys have been listening, but tomorrow is part 3 of Marie Antoinette's life. So you want to tune in to finish her crazy life and everything that happened. I was most fascinated by what happened to her children after she died. I was always curious. So for part 4, you'll learn about the children, but tomorrow we're focusing on the revolution.
Yeah, it's the end of Marie Antoinette tomorroh.
Yeah.
End of her life.
4. We got 3 and 4. Well, Marie Antoinette, she ends, but then 4.
Yes. Yeah.
And did you guys have any more questions for Claudine about Hadley? Hadley's definitely my favorite Paris wife, although it's hard to say. Definitely not Mary. No, not Mary. I think that.
I think I would go Hadley and then Martha, because I just think Martha was just such a kick-ass lady.
Yeah.
And then I don't know who I'd pick for 3 or 4. It'd be a toss-up.
Not a fan of either of these ladies.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stop at 2.
So Carol's asking where the podcasts are. You can go just Google La Vie Creative podcast. And it'll come right up, or on the page you're on right now, there's a link. But anytime you type in La Vie Creative podcast, it comes right up on Google. It's also on iTunes, Spotify, and you can see it right under my face, La Vie Creative podcast. You'll find all the episodes. And every Monday, it's a regular show now where I talk to Claudine, Paris history, Avec, and Hemingway, and we talk about fascinating women in French history, creative women in French history. And then on Wednesdays, you can listen to interviews with living creatives in Paris. So talk about the dead people on Mondays, Wednesdays, who are doing creative things today. Obviously, Paris has inspired so many people, and there's so much to talk about when it comes to creativity in France.
Yeah, we've got so many good ones. The Rose Valland coming up. We just did Zelda this week, Zelda Fitzgerald, and Barrett Morisot. We have Coco Chanel, which would be interesting. We've got lots of them. We have a very, very long list too.
Yeah, so you can check out La Vie Creative to listen to both those Mondays and Wednesdays. So Monday is our Claudine day, and then Wednesday are interviews with living creatives. People are still kicking.
Yeah.
And also we've started a book club. If you guys want to join, just send me a message. It's in a private Facebook group, and right now we're reading Renoir's Dancer, and that is all about Suzanne Valadon.
Yeah, which was our first episode, which you could find in the podcast link.
La Vie Creative. And I'm really loving the book because I live in Montmartre and I love the history there. And that's actually where Suzanne lived. And she was for all those famous artists that we love.
Fascinating woman.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Carol. Carol's going to have to watch internet issues.
Uh-oh. Well, we'll record it.
Yeah, this will be sitting on the page if you want to watch it later. But I really appreciate you guys joining. And if you want more action, we both have Patreon pages where I know, well, Claudine, you can talk a little bit about yours. You're doing a lot of amazing things on your Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon is a really great way to kind of support the creative people out there. So I have different levels. Mine are all, named after wine, rosé, Bordeaux, and champagne, of course. But there's different levels, and with that, you get all sorts of extra things. So when I am in Paris, I do tours. I do, the Hemingway tour is probably the most popular one that I do, of course. But I do a lot of tours, so you get discounts on the tours, but you could also, I'll do live videos from there. You also get kind of on my Instagram, Claudine Bleu, Rouge. Every single day, there's a big history lesson every day. So I'll give you more info on where that painting was or where exactly that building was. So when you're in Paris, you could go find them too. So there's all sorts of good things. And then mine on Patreon is Bleu, Rouge.
Yeah, I feel like I really love you can take a history tour without having to go to Paris right now, which is really great because, travel's kind of on pause. So that's a great one. And for my Patreon, it's more focused on the artists. So you can actually receive letters from Paris, artwork from Paris with some of the artists I've worked with. I send you packages. Also, I'm a photographer, so I have a lot of beautiful landscape photography of Paris. Every month you get new pictures of Paris, beautiful, those French windows with the flowers, the Eiffel Tower, and they are all high resolution. So you can print, put them on your walls, use them as social media, whatever you want to do with them. We also have the book club for both of us. And then I also have a PDF from each artist I interviewed, the living artist. I asked them their favorite creative resources. So you can get the resources straight from the artist of what they're doing, what they're using to be inspired to create some things, books, music, podcasts, everything that's helping them create to kind of inspire you to find your creation. So that is on both of our Patreons. So what I'll do is I will share our links in this after we finish. But I'm so happy to have you all here today. Thank you for coming. And Danielle, I hope your book arrives soon. Try Kindle, download the virtual copy. That's what I did. I put it on Kindle. I think all shipping's a little delayed right now. Oh, Molly's here. Molly's going to be one of our living creatives.
Yay. Molly and Oliver, delicious. What is her croquembouche she made the other day or yesterday? I saw the picture. Oh, looks delicious.
Molly is actually living the dream in Versailles and giving cooking classes virtually and in person for when you're in Versailles. She's amazing. So keep a lookout for Molly on the podcast and listen up tomorrow to listen to our next installment of Marie Antoinette's life. And we will talk to you all soon.
Yeah, we'll see you again in a few weeks.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. A bientôt.
A bientôt. Thank you, guys. Oh, so happy to hear it, Carol.